Prof, thanks so much for your time. Perhaps let's begin with Durban, as that was the most recent meeting. What happened at that meeting?
Well, we've had several meetings under BRICS. We assumed the chairship on the 1st of January for the full year.
You mean South Africa?
South Africa. We are hosting the summit for the second time. If you'll recall, in 2013, we hosted the summit in Durban. And it is now our turn to host, but it's a significant year because it's the 10th anniversary of BRICS Summit. And we are privileged to be hosting the summit in July this year at the Sandton International Convention Center from the 25th to the 27th of July. Now, South Africa, during its tenure of chairship, will host about 100 meetings. And that gives you an indication of the vast scope of cooperation.
Where everywhere in the BRICS
throughout the country.
Okay.
Throughout the country.
Oh, not in the region.
Just in South Africa as a whole. We took a decision that the summit, while the summit is taking place here in Gauteng, that we use the opportunity of hosting BRICS Summit to showcase South Africa to the international community, to our BRICS partners. So our meetings are scattered throughout the country.
Yes. Prof, I understand that there was some 1.8 billion rand, and please correct me if my figures are wrong, that was spent on projects last year. If you can just tell us, where did this money go? Exactly what projects?
When we created the new development bank, and significantly the decision to create the bank was taken at the summit in South Africa in 2013. And 2 years later, the bank opened doors with its headquarters in Shanghai. And last year, we opened the first regional center here in Sandton, the Africa Regional Center. Yes, you are correct. A total of $3.2 billion has been dispersed through two tranches of projects thus far, in 2016 and 2017. And this year, we will have a further 7 or 8 projects that are under consideration. Now, all of the projects focuses specifically on sustainable development and infrastructure. So these projects that are scattered throughout the BRICS countries, including South Africa, the one project that has been funded by the New Development Bank is to Eskom on the electricity transmission grid, to the value of $180 million. Currently, the Africa Regional Center is looking at about 6 projects, infrastructure projects, that we want to submit to the New Development Bank for consideration for funding during the course of this year. So the projects look at various dimensions of infrastructure, from physical infrastructure to ICT to water, and so forth.
So help me understand, which kind of companies can tender to participate in these projects? Are they?
No, at the moment it's restricted to governments. We haven't opened it up to a private sector yet.
Okay.
But that is in the process. We are in the process of looking at opening up to lending to the private sector. That should happen during the course of this year. So thus far, all of the 13 or so projects that have been funded by the NDB are government-driven infrastructure projects.
Right. Yes. And Prof, leads me to my next question. How when these governments come and access the funding, sort of in what currency is it that they're accessing funding? Because right now we've got a situation where many African countries are, finding themselves in trouble for having taken too much money out in foreign currency when it comes to paying it back. How does it work with BRICS?
At the moment, it is still in dollar denomination, but we have signed the BRICS Interbank Cooperation Mechanism, whereby we can start borrowing and trading in the local currency. So that is quite advanced, and that is our objective, is to start lending in the local currency. And that's on track, and it should come on board very soon.
Prof, are the BRICS members still looking for a ratings agency? And how soon before that is set up? Well,
we took a decision, our leaders, at the summit in Goa in 2016 to explore the possibility of a credit rating agency. Work is underway by the expert group. It is a complex issue. It's not going to happen overnight, and we don't want to rush it. We want to ensure that whatever mechanism is ultimately agreed upon is something that just doesn't address the BRICS country. It is globally credible and acceptable, and also speaks to the needs of the South. And that's the main motivating factor. is that we needed a rating agency that is anchored in the South.
All this talk about trade protectionism, particularly from the US, what does this mean for the BRICS bloc? Is it a threat?
Well, I think protectionism in any form, including especially trade protectionism, is counterproductive. As South Africa, and I believe as BRICS countries as a whole, these are some of the issues we'll be discussing during the trade ministers meeting, and it will also feature prominently in the agenda of the leaders meeting, because trade protectionism is counter to what we have been promoting in terms of creating an open, equitable global environment where all of us can benefit. But protectionism can be counterproductive, especially in the current form that it's taking.
And the Africa Continental Free Trade Area recently signed, well, some parts of that deal was signed in Kigali earlier this year. What does that mean? Because I'm trying to understand, how does the BRICS member grouping fall within that?
Yes. Well, the African Continental Free Trade Area is, in the first instance, speak to Africa's economic integration. And as you know, inter-African trade is under 15%. Whereas you look at other trading blocs like the EU, ASEAN, is between 40 to 60%. So in the first instance, we need to create an enabling environment where we significantly scale up and increase trade between ourselves. And that is what the African Continental Free Trade Agreement seeks to address in terms of our economic integration. Of course, countries like BRICS have a role to play, because China is the second largest global economy, major trading partner in the African continent, India likewise, Brazil, Russia. So by having the free trade agreement, it's in the first instance speaks to Africa's need, but at the same time it provides opportunities for our partners, including the BRICS partners.
Parting question, any lessons learned from the Eurozone, that Euro bloc, particularly when it comes to having member countries who are very different when it comes to the growth of their economies, or even the position of their economies, very different when it comes to the strength of their currencies, and even political leadership. Lessons from Europe to avoid a scenario a couple of years from now where we've got the BRICS split.
Well, I think we are looking at the global template. The EU is one example. I have personal experience. I served 6 years in Brussels as ambassador to the EU. And we have observed the fault lines, Brexit being one of them. But we also look at other trading blocs that are working quite well. ASEAN, they created the ASEAN Economic Community in 2015. That's also a very good example. So we draw on best practices from such blocs like ASEAN and the EU, and we are also mindful of the pitfalls. I think we can learn from their mistakes and ensure that in Africa, I think the major issue is we don't rush, as you've correctly pointed out. We have different levels of development on the continent. We have advanced economies like Nigeria and South Africa. We have LDCs, largest number of LDCs are concentrated in Africa, and we have small island developing states. So you have quite a mixed bag of economies on the African continent. We have to be cognizant of this, and we must ensure that we move together as a bloc, mindful that some are more advanced and others need to be developed, and that we take into account that.